what I want to do is I want to work on round concave layers, and I also want to work on triangular concave layers. So I'm going to do a few different things. One of the great things about hair cutting for me has been the years of experimentation and trying different things and figuring different ways out. And if you watch me, what you'll notice or you'll see is that that's really all I'm doing, is I'm literally finding all of these classic shapes and I'm finding different ways to do them. And I'm going to share a few different ways of doing classic round concave layering with you today. Really simple variations, not quite so complicated and so technical as some can be. So kind of more condensed versions, if you will. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work this one side here, and what I'm aiming for is I'm actually going to pivot right off of this front point right here, and I'm going to start with my profile, kind of like you've seen me do, working with that profile section, following the curvature of the head through this frontal area and extending that line into the back. So using head shape to achieve this kind of direction of what I'm cutting, this cutting angle. And generally what I would do then is I would kind of work block sectioning, horizontal sections next to each other, and then bring up to the ceiling or bring into the middle, depending on how much of a concave that I want to create through here and how much length I want to preserve. So this version, kind of very 90s. I think I remember kind of playing around with this after seeing somebody else do it. I can't quite remember who it was, but it would have been someone that I worked with at Sassoon. And instead of pivoting from the crown, which we would normally see kind of a standard way, or pivoting off that occipital in the back, we were actually pivoting off this front hairline. So that's how I'm going to approach it. So it's kind of like working it backwards. I'm going to go this way with it. Now what's going to happen is it's obviously going to be lighter in the front, and as I work that around, obviously by lifting up, I'm going to keep some of that length. But what's going to happen is we have a hairline that is higher up here in the front and lower in the back, right? And it actually comes up a little bit and then down and all that kind of stuff. So what it's going to do is it's going to kind of leave that front area open and shorter as well. So I'm going to do that. I'll get started on that, and I'm going to let Kelly come in because Kelly's back.
Yay!
From her Oakland trip.
I was Bay Area busy. I worked a day at Pony Salon in Oakland and then taught a class at Ginger Rubio Salon. It was a really cool class that I just taught. It was scissor and razor class. So we did half scissor, half razor. Really fun, new curriculum, very excited about. So I am also going to be working with a triangular shape and a round shape today, but with the razor. So I'm going to be doing round on one side and triangular on the other, meaning that it's going to be shorter in the front to longer in the back on one side, and then shorter in the back to longer in the front on the other side. I did the same sectioning for both sides just so we could really get a good visual of what the difference between those two shapes are going to look like on the head. So using my comb to find where I wanted to section it. So from the parietal ridge down, I sectioned that off to like right behind the ear in that high recession. And then again at the crown here, down into that ear hole here. The mastoid process, is that it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then from the occipital bone down into that mastoid process right there. So I'm going to be starting with this first section in the front here, and I'm just going to be pulling everything forward. I'll be taking sections about the width of my finger here. Let me drop her down a do. Taking my subsections within here, following the hairline around. And I'll be pulling all of this forward into that section, just creating like a nice open face framing layer in the front here. Okay, so this is really going to open up the face, and I think this will be a cool thing to see with the triangular and the round layers on both sides to see how that does affect what is showcasing in the haircut. So I'm going to be kind of pulling this straight into my chest here. I don't want to do a low elevation because that would give me a really heavy line. So I want to elevate that just a little bit so that it has a little bit of a softer frame. And I'm just going to be following the shape of the hairline around here. Coming into the side. And then dropping this down. I'm making sure that I'm not elevating this too much and kind of just letting the blade carve through the hair as I'm going down onto the sides. And I'll take a pretty big section here. I'm also going to be doing some weight removal as I come through with the razor here so that we get lots of like texture and movement throughout the haircut. So as I'm pulling through here, I want to see where my really dense areas are, where I can't really see through. This is less dense here because of the way that the hairline comes back in there, so there's less hair for me to be working with, but here it's way more dense because there is more hair to be dealing with. So I want to do some weight removal and take out some hair in here so that we have even density throughout, and then following my guide.
Okay, so I've taken my first section right off this point right here in the parting, all the way into the back hairline. So obviously a little bit thinner up front, getting slightly wider as we go down to the hairline in the back. Now I haven't pre-cut anything on the outline. So whenever we're doing kind of layers or we're working on that longer hair, what we really want to think about is what we want to do with the outline. And whatever we want to do with the outline kind of determines what we do on the inside. So if I start with the outline, then it's all about protecting that outline. So then there has to be certain things that I have to do with the knowledge that the hairline comes up shorter and higher into the front than it is in the back. So there's certain things I would have to do to preserve that outline that I've already created. Now if I go straight into the layering, because of the verticalness of this haircut, then what's going to start to happen with this, with the layering, is that outline's going to be softer as you work through. Obviously, if I work through horizontally, then I start to achieve much more solid shapes horizontally. So what I'm going to do is go straight into the interior, into the layering. So I'm going to work from the front. So the frontal panel works from this front hairline up to the apex. So I'm really just going to work that area first, and then I'll deal with that afterwards. And really what I'm looking for here is I'm not looking to just invent the angle here. Now if I was working with an extremely long length, then I would probably have to invent an angle to protect that length. Now I know that this is probably not going to be all the way up here. So I could probably just follow this part of the head shape here. And I tend to find from my experience that when I do follow this part of the head shape, it works to that individual. We've all got that, and it's all kind of, you know, uniquely yours. So it's a different angle for different people, right? So if I work with that, I tend to find it just works better when it falls. And again, it just depends on the steepness of it. Now, if I need to know where this is going to fall, then I can take that little piece there, and I could just snip that off where I want my framing to start. So I can now take that and incorporate that into this, and now I have a guide to work from. Work smarter, not harder. So I'm just going to follow the contour of that frontal with my finger angle, and therefore my cutting angle works the same. Straight out from the head shape and straight up. So pulling away from what I want to keep. So now I'm extending that line into the back. I'm not going to follow the head shape down now. If I do that, then that's what's going to happen with this. I'm going to start to see my weight line do something like that. So what I want it to do is I want it to cascade and get longer and heavier towards the back. So I'm going to continue that trajectory or that angle so I can create fluidity within the haircut. So all I'm doing is just continuing that all the way up, lifting everything I see in this section up towards the ceiling, and continuing that angle longer Whatever reaches, reaches, and if it doesn't, it will drop out. So right there is the actual length of the mannequin. I can see just a piece dropping out there. So I've preserved the length that the mannequin already has in the back. Now I know that the hairline starts to come up and around, so we're going to start to see that happen with the length. So I'm actually okay with that because I want it shaggier and more face framed in the front. I want that round concave shape. So all I'm going to do now is pivot off that front and continue to lift my sections just straight up to the ceiling. So I take my second section, I pivot out a little bit further, and number one's gonna be the guide, but I'm not gonna pull two into number one. I'm just gonna continue to lift each section straight up so that I don't get any longer weight distribution in here. I just want it to actually get shorter as I get towards the front. So as far as body position is concerned here, what I'm going to do is I'm literally going to face the angle of the section. So there's the section angle. So my shoulders need to face, they need to be parallel to that. My feet need to be parallel to that. So I'm literally going to pivot with this haircut. So I start here, I'm going to finish right there. So I'll walk with it. So again, face that section, no longer facing that center parting anymore. And there it is. So I'll just continue that all the way around and pivot all the way through. And it gives me a nice round concave, which can be called a curtain layer or a butterfly layer or a shag. Anything that is lighter in the front, heavier in the back. So I could go quite extreme with this and start to get much more mullet kind of shapes. Again, what makes things like this extreme is differences in length, so quite short to quite long. There could be disconnections involved.
So there's that first section. Now I moved into that next triangle section, took like a sub-parting here, and I'm going to be using this little piece of what I already cut as my guide moving forward. Now I don't want to use this whole section here because we've pulled all of this forward, so this is much longer than this one as it's cut. So I don't want to be using this as my guide because then we'd be going too short and we'd be losing the shape that we're trying to get, which would be shorter in the front to longer in the back. So making sure that this is right at that top of the round from the parietal ridge, using that as my guide to come through here. So now I have to stand behind my guide because with the razor, when I'm layering, I want to flip this over and work from underneath. I don't want to come in from over top here. So I'm just going to be pulling these sections into my previous so that we continue to get a round shape, and I can see my guide as I'm coming through. It'll start to kind of pop out there, which is right there. And then following this round into it. And then splitting that in half and bringing this section into it. So now also being mindful of if I was working in a salon, my mirror would be here so that I could see which way I'm pushing the hair, making sure that I'm pushing right into my previous section and not over directing all the way into my first one. Elevate this up and look for my guide. Now with razor cutting too, we have to go past our guide before we cut into it. So we really have to have a visual of where you're going before you go in to cut all of those layers. You can see now that it's following down really nicely. So now with this next section here, what I'm going to be doing is I want to have this kind of extreme. So I'm just going to be taking, again, this little spot right here from the top of that section as my guide moving into this next section so that I don't go too short with my layers in the back. But on these ones, I am going to be creating my own guide, so I want to go from this short point into the length into the back. Let me give her a little spin here so I get body position. Is that good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we can see my guide there, that short piece that's falling out there. I'm going to elevate this up, straight up to the ceiling, and then just connect that into the length. So that guide will drop out, and I can see that's my clue of where I want to start. And then concave, short to long into the length. And bring each one of these sections up into that last one there. So we get a really big extreme drop down in the back here. And as I'm pulling this up, I'm seeing how dense this hair is in this section right here that I can't really see through it. So I am going to be do some weight removal here so that it's much more balanced throughout the haircut. So just kind of going in and taking out slices. I would say this is kind of like if you would do point cutting or slide cutting like afterwards, after your haircut, or even, during. Usually a lot of detail work with the scissors afterwards, but with the razor I like to do it while the hair is wet. I don't like to do a lot of detail work after the hair is dry on a razor cut.
I think that's one of the luxuries of using the razor. You're detailing it as you go, aren't you?
You can really, I feel like my razor cuts go so much faster because I can do a lot of that detailing while the hair is sitting there. While I can see it kind of like reacting to as I'm cutting the razor, there is such a large reaction too. Since I'm holding the hair and cutting it off here, the stuff that I cut off is what's left in my hand, which is kind of the opposite of the scissor. When you're cutting, what falls on the floor is what you cut off, and what's left is what you're still holding, because you're cutting on the top of the fingers or inside of the fingers. So having that bounce back once that hair is released, you really get a good gauge of like what's happening within the haircut. So that's pretty much it as far as like the round side for me. It moves so quickly when you can just get in there and kind of take the bulk out and have a direction. I'm just going to clean up this line here a little bit. And then I'll move into the triangular section in a minute, but we can just kind of take a look at how this flows, where you can see the layers cascading down into the back, and then we still have our length down here. And it really opens up that cheekbone area, gives it kind of that curtain bang, right? I think you always say it's the most popular haircut on the planet, the round concave. There's so many variations of it that we can do, but this is just a really simple, beautiful razor cut, and you can see how the texture is kind of popping through. So when I move into my triangle side, I'm going to be working from the back to the front now. I'm going to be kind of coming up and over, and I'll be using this point, which is the shortest point of my haircut, as my length for while I start my triangular layers.
So I've pivoted around and now I'm on that last section. So here's my hairline. And there's my guide. So again, short up into long, proper concave, pivoted around from that profile angle, so fully horizontal, into vertical. So just like so. That's giving me really cool variation of round concave. Like we were saying, there's so many variants of this shape. It's so cool. There's so many variants of all the shapes of hair cutting. The key is to understanding the fundamentals. It's to understand all this stuff that you probably sometimes see on the info wall. I don't need that. But if we don't really understand those fundamentals, then it's really quite difficult to, or it's not super difficult, it's just harder to grasp all the other possibilities. To me, haircutting is pretty simple. You pull away from what you want to keep, right? So I always keep that mantra in my head, pull away from what you want to keep, pull away from what you want to keep. And that always kind of helps me to figure out different ways. Now, a lot of the ways that you see me do sometimes are how I would cross-check something. So it's really just flipping it around. Once you know those fundamentals, it's quite easy to start playing around with different things. The one thing I've never done though is I've never broken the rules. I don't quite believe in that. I stick with the rules, they're there for a reason. And understanding that, you know, if I pull away from something that it's going to get longer, that really is a key thing for me to grasping haircutting or figuring out what to do in the shape. So I want to do another variation of round concave. And this one's really simple. So what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to come through with standard, classic, vertical diagonal sectioning. And I'm going to pull the hair to the front through here. Now, what we would normally do on a face frame is kind of work down and kind of follow that head shape down into the sides. And that kind of cuts away a lot of that weight in that face frame. So what I'm going to do through here is a little bit different. This is super old school. Something that when I was learning the shake, or what's known in the US as the shag haircut, I think it's known as the shag everywhere now. But back when I first started cutting hair, you couldn't really say shag for a haircut. It wasn't the same thing. So it's called the shake in the Vidal Sassoon world. And this is kind of how some of it was done. So I'm going to figure out, you know, where do I want that to fall? Obviously, I started longer with the other one and got more of the, you know, face frame, as you can see. So now what I'm going to do is just work from the front point of the hairline to the parietal ridge and establish my layer. Now, if you're looking this way, you're going to see my elevation. And I'm literally just working off of this slope on the head shape. So it kind of brings me down into kind of like eyebrow area. I think where my fingers are, right? Yeah? So I'm kind of going to bring it to that. So if you think about that right now, I'm pulling the hair down. So when I cut this, the top part is heavier than the bottom part of that section. That section is this thick. All right? So it's leaving a little bit of weight on the top. So you could say it's like graduation. Hence the name of this haircut in the late 60s, early 70s was called forward graduation. So now all I'm going to do is I'm going to take this piece and add it to that. So I'm going to keep my fingers and my elevation where it was. So whatever's on the top part of the round of the head is going to come down to that. And whatever's below the round of the head is going to come up to that. So I'm going to get this bevel, but I'm going to get this concave layer through the underneath. And I'm going to bring everything to a stationary position. So if I had a specific length that I was working with, then I would put my length in to begin with, and I would work from that middle point to that length. I'm not quite concerned about that. I know I'm going to get longer as I move towards the back, because the hairline descends towards the back. So I pull that forward. And I bring that onto it, into it. So you can see when you look at that profile shot, what's happening with that sectioning, where that elevation is going. So I'll just continue now to take vertical diagonal back sections and pull forward onto that. So again, from middle head Superietal ridge. We're just making up new words today.
Middle
Yeah, middle head.
Middle head. What was the one you used? I forgot now.
What?
You said something.
Ear hole.
Ear hole. That was it. Middle head and ear hole. And now bringing this into it, guys. So obviously, whatever we have, again, bringing it to that elevation. So I like to use the head shape to kind of give me a clue or an idea of elevation, you know? So I'm working off the slope of that frontal area, which kind of brings me to my eyebrow level. So everything's coming down to that and up to that.
Okay, so I'm working from the back to the front. Now on this side, I started in this back section from the occipital bone up to the crown. This is where I'm starting my haircut. And then I just measured with my comb how long my shortest piece was here, and then used that as my guide to start from there. So that's the shortest piece that's going to be in our haircut moving forward here as we're doing triangular now, so short in the back to long in the front. I coming in underneath here, over directing into that first one on this section. I'm gonna over direct all the way to the original section, and then pulling this out straight out of the head and following that around. So I come in underneath here and I can see my guide through, and then just using a smaller stroke here just because I want to have a little bit more wispiness. A bigger stroke would be bigger sections with the blade, and that kind of leaves it a little bit more chunky, where a smaller stroke will just have the ends be a little bit softer and wispier. So just taking these sections and over directing that all the way back into that previous, or that first guide section there. Now as I'm pulling this out, I'm going to also be checking for the density again, because I want to have a lot of texture in there. So I'm just going to flip my blade over here and kind of come in and take these, I kind of say like Nike swoosh, as you kind of carve into it, to take out those big chunks so that there's space and movement. Now coming in here too, as I'm working with the layers on this, I'm working with more of the center of the blade, the middle of the blade coming through. A lot of people say sometimes they have a hard time feeling like they're actually cutting the hair with the blade. I always use a fresh blade for every haircut, but I also really like the analogy of like when you want to slice into a tomato, you can really feel when the sharpness of the blade is hooking into the hair. It has a lot to do with the pitch of the blade. If you're hitting the hair at the right angle where you can kind of like shave the hair, but if you feel like you're pushing the hair, then you're not at the right pitch with the blade. So you really want to feel that like catch in. And then you want the blade to do the cutting. You don't want to push the blade into the hair, right? Like if you hit a tomato and you went straight down, it would just smash all over the place. You really kind of got to hook it in a little bit to get the cutting. Same thing too, if you're just starting into razor work, I always say give it a good wind up before you start hitting the razor, and you don't want to hit the hair first and then try to cut. You really want to have a wind into it with a proper angle of the blade. Okay, so now I pulled all the stuff into this previous section here, following that with the head, and so now I'm going to have this part be my guide moving forward into my next section. So I'm going to take a look here to see what shape I've created, which would be short to long into there. So I'm just going to be following that through into the front, just over directing into my previous in this second section here. So we are going to be getting longer towards the front, but I don't want a huge extreme. I just want a little bit of graduation, and then this one will be all directed back into that previous, so we'll have more of a drop off in the front.
On the last bit, so I've just worked vertical diagonal sections back. You could literally do this in 3 sections or 2 panels maybe. It's a relatively easy way of thinking about it. I would say the hardest part is obviously grasping all the hair and stuff. But as you can see, when you're doing something like this, when you start to condense, then the control starts to get a bit looser. So that would be, you know, with every haircut and every way of doing something, there's a pro and there's a con about it. I think that's probably the con about this. But don't we want the edge to be softer, you know what I mean? So look how nice that creates that cascading kind of layered effect in the haircut. I could have gone a bit shorter with that, I think. Anyway, what I'll do is I'll just pull this over here. So I'll get rid of that lip that happens when we do a face frame, right? Little trick here is if you take that frontal panel, so low apex to about where the hairline starts to become vertical, and just take that over to the other side. I worked with somebody that called this across the street, Mr. Chromeans. All right, so you're bringing the hair across the street to the other side, and parallel to that, you see. So that is the length that we have here. And this is some of the excess that's making this heavy. So I'm just going to take that corner off, like so. And now we'll just make that sit better in that area. But this particular shape I really like, because now that I've got that in there, obviously I could choose to leave this longer. But I could also turn this kind of shape now into like a layered bob. So we've got the interior shape there, but now I could just kind of take this length here and just take this. So we can transform it into a few different shapes. So I like to do that too. I like to, you know, show that you can utilize the same technique. You can do a lot of shag kind of techniques, and then you could bob off the length, you know what I mean? You could go much shorter with that. You could even do what I did earlier and go quite short with that and get this nice little fringe bang area. Lift everything into that. And then you could cut this around here and you get a really like cool kind of French bob effect to it. Much simpler than some of the other ways that we choose to do. I think what you need to realize in haircutting is that it's just like GPS. It's just like satellite navigation. There's so many ways that we could choose to get home from work, unless you live next door, like I do. But we can choose like the most scenic way to get to somewhere, can't we? Or we could choose the quickest way. That's just like these haircuts. So to me, it's all about understanding and figuring out those fundamentals. And you know, how I like to do it is I like to do it in a more simplified way. So talk about simplified, let's move into the triangular now. I'm going to do something a little bit different. We're going to do a kind of a layered bob situation. It's going to be lighter in the back with the layering and then heavier through into the front. So the process of doing a layered bob has been forever, cut the bob, layer it. I want to kind of do something a little bit different, because if I cut the bob, that's an entire process of cutting the bob and trying to protect the length where the ear is and dealing with all the different growth patterns and stuff like that. One of the hardest things to create with all this hair is an even line. So I want to try and make this as easy as possible. I don't want to do one haircut and then have to do another haircut on top of it. So I'll do a bob and then do a layered bob over it. I want to kind of mix the two haircuts together in the process of achieving them. So when it comes to cutting the outline, I only cut a specific amount of outline. I don't cut the whole thing to begin with. So I don't cut the bob in its entirety. I just cut just enough to give me a guide.
I just realized you put water here for me.
I did.
Thanks.
You're very well.
I was wondering why you went over there.
I didn't.
That's very considerate.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so one of the things that in my almost 30 years experience now doing this is listening to people, listening to hairdressers and what they ask. Because what they ask is what they need to know. So one of the number one questions I've ever been asked when it comes to cutting a bob is, what do I do about hairline? What do I do with growth patterns that don't work for that hairline, like cowlicks and stuff like that? If I take the smallest of sections, like I was taught when I first started cutting hair at Vidal Sassoon, then I don't really do anything about cowlicks. I make it much harder on myself because I've got less hair now in this scenario. Now, this scenario isn't reality. Your client isn't going to walk around with just this section of hair hanging out and the rest of it pinned away, right? What they're going to do is they're going to wear their hair down. So they're going to have all of this density that's going to be pushing that hairline down. Now, if I take one little section out of them, put everything else away, then if there's any kind of, movement in there, we're going to really see it. But again, this isn't a reality situation. So technically, the way we've been taught to cut the bob is probably the hardest way you could possibly do it. It's like doing the 100-meter sprint, but instead of it just being a sprint, there's hurdles along the way, right? So I kind of want it to just be a sprint. I don't want any hurdles. So I'm actually going to take a larger section because the density there is going to kind of compensate and it's going to suppress any form of movement in the hairline. So ideally I would probably want more hair, but I'm going to leave it at this. What I'm doing is I'm sectioning out the occipital ridge. The occipital ridge is in direct line with where that hairline is in the front. So I know that when I cut an outline, anywhere I cut the outline, wherever it is, if I then use the length of the occipital ridge, I know that I'm going to protect the length in the front. The nape is bonus hair. We don't have that in the front, right? So I have to keep this level, this part of the head shape in mind, not so much the nape. So I'm going to cut the nape first. I'm going to cut my outline. So I'll comb that down. We'll go on the longer side. So I'm going to go past that neckline. Yes, the mannequin doesn't have shoulders. Quite aware of that. If we didn't have, or if we had shoulders, then obviously I would cut the back. Then I'd probably turn the head around and extend that line into the front. Simple ways of doing that. Or I could kind of try and traverse the shoulder if I want to make it complicated and I want a little bit more kind of oomph in the day, So here's that. I've got that first section done.
Just to really feel alive.
Yeah, like challenge myself.
Yeah.
Oops.
Yeah.
It's like playing with fire, and you've got like a lighter and you keep lighting it for no reason, right? It's that kind of stuff. So what I'm doing now, back to this, is I've put my outline in, right? So I'm now going to use that as the guide. And I'm going to do this, I'm going to break it into panels, into zones, whatever you want to call different panels, sections, zones, panels. So I'm literally just going to section away the top front area. So right behind the ear, yeah? Could I do all this all in one? I could if I wanted to. Again, if I want to get there quicker, it's knowing how to put my foot down and get there quicker if I want to. So now what I've not done is I've not continued to do the bob and kind of risk creating that hole in the front, right? The troublesome area. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to establish my layering of the haircut. I've got enough outline. I'm going to use the length at the occipital ridge as the guide. There it is. And I'm going to cut a layer that follows the contour of the head shape from that point. So there it is. So now following that crown, drop her down now. Hope you guys are enjoying this. It's been a while since we've done a live. So now continuing that through, so my fingers are doing the best to match what the head shape is. It's never going to be perfectly matched. Right, we need machines to do that, so you're going to get as close to visually possible to that. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to pull away from what I want to keep. I want it to get heavier towards the front. It's going to be triangular in shape, so I'm going to pull the hair backwards, away from the front. I'm not going to pull everything into the middle. I'm going to pull everything straight back to the wall behind the mannequin. There the outline drops away at the occipital ridge, and then I continue by following the head shape over that. So now you start to see the layering on top of the outline. Now if I don't want these layers to be this long, then I'll actually change the angle of what I cut. So instead of cutting more head shape, I'll start to cut more flatter through there, so it leaves more weight and length towards the front. Pull away from what you want to keep. Always use that mantra in anything you're trying to create, and it will really help you.
It's so helpful, like having that just as that little go-to in your head, especially if you're feeling lost in a haircut. You can just take that minute to tell yourself that and recenter to be able to get back on track. But like, where am I going with this? What do I need to do, right?
Yeah, find where you want it to be lighter and shorter and start there. That's the easiest way of doing it. You can do it different ways. You can start in the heaviest and get shorter, but that's a whole other day of learning, isn't it?
Yeah.
We could teach you that, but it's another thing. Keep it simple. Pull away from what you want to keep. That will allow you to kind of really work fundamentally within your hair cutting and add a little bit more stability and efficiency to the shapes that you're trying to create. What it takes away is it takes away the blow dry and styling element after you've done the haircut. You're literally cutting the style into the hair. So it's going to look decent before you blow dry it. The blow drying is just more icing on the cake, isn't it? So look how nice that's looking. But I see I've got my length still through here. I've not cut any of that part of the length yet. I'm protecting that for now. All I'm going to do now is I'm going to continue that profile section. So what was vertical now turns to horizontal. And I'm going to continue the angle that I've created in the crown is now, when I start to continue, as you can see that's now getting longer towards the front. That's what we're going to keep doing. So instead of following the head shape down over that apex, we're now going to project and keep getting longer. So what does that do as opposed to the other side? That fills in this area. Whereas on the other side, we cut rounder, so it's lighter in the front, it opens up that front. So again, it's all what you don't want to do and what you don't want to do with that face.
Okay, so I'm just coming into that front section as well. Give her a little spin here. Done a little bit of pre-style, like a preset over here, which I do a lot with my styling, like as my clients are sitting in the chair, cutting and styling at the same time, which saves me a ton of time. Let's see. So now I just took a tiny section from that very beginning of that last triangle here, and that's going to be my guide going into the front. Oh, let me spin her. Is this okay? Can you see? I'm going this way. Okay. And then now I can see what's left. I can see where my guide is, and then into all of that length. So I want this to be extreme here, so I'm just going to be taking my angle and using my blade to really connect those points into that length there. Slowly tapping that off, and then bringing each one of these sections up into that guide until it doesn't reach anymore, and really exaggerating just that last little bit there so that we get that fullness in the front. And I think this is one of those benefits of having the razor too, is the extreme that you can get as far as sliding. Same with like face framing layers, that we can start with something pretty short up here and using that blade to kind of slide into really, really extreme lengths. just gonna condense this all here into my last section. And elevate that all the way up. It should just be a tiny little bit loose, loosey-goosey. All right, so we have all of that length still in the front. So now my styling, how I'm going to do this. Now I don't have any product in this hair, but you can see our layers now. Coming down so short into long. So almost, it's just the opposite of what we did on the other side. I'm gonna tip off just this length here a bit. So it's looking a little long. So usually when it's like just a small little bit like that, I'll just kind of collect it and pinch it between my fingers. And then just tap off that tiny little bit there. Okay, and knowing the tool that I'm using too with the razor, things aren't going to be straight and precise. It is, the tool gives that looser, softer feeling. I'm gonna put these guys away. So knowing that, we're gonna be getting that looser finish. So now I like to call this the rake and shake, where I kind of just come in and rake my fingers through, kind of leaving wide sections, but then pinching my fingers together as I'm coming through to kind of seal that cuticle layer a little bit and help kind of pull some of that moisture through. And then just let that, shake it out a little bit and let that fall. And this is a really big go-to styling technique that I do for a lot of my clients in the chair. It's easy to show them how to do this. This is also something super accessible that they can do on their own. So it feels almost like a hair hack for your clients. You know, you show them that you just take these big sections, rake it through, shake it a little bit, and then scrunch it up. And it gives a really, really nice beachy wave. Or shows off that natural texture really, really nicely. So same thing, just kind of raking that through, shake it out a little bit, and then I just make sure that the ends are nice and smooth before I drop it down, and then give it a little scrunch.
All right, so this is where this haircut comes together. And this is what I love about haircutting. It's like connecting the dots. So obviously I've established the length first, and then I've gone in and done the layers, you know, and then obviously I've got this length through the front area that I've not touched. But you see, now I don't have all of that hair that I have to deal with as I'm creating the bob. And now, because I've worked my layers through to that point in the front, I now have a place to aim for. So that's my length there, and that's the length in the back. Now, if I have a specific length that I want to work with, I could take that front piece at the beginning, bring it down to where I want the length to be, and cut it right there. And then when I'm working through with my layers, I'm going to see that spot right on top. So therefore, what I'll do is I'll meet that as I work through with the layer. So that's how you can hack this simple version of creating a layered bob. See, all I have to do now, guys, is create the length. From that little bit of length that I had in the back, and I can meet that length in the front. I can cut it where I want, actually, but it's there if I need it. Cut it behind the cheekbone. That's the sides. Boom. So, a triangular layered bob, by just cutting a little bit of my outline, using the top of that, which is at the occipital ridge, as my guide, and continuing that all the way through, pulling back, pulling up, pulling out. And on this side, we've got another variant of a layered bob, but instead of it being full in here, we've taken the weight away. So what I did two variations for you, just to catch you up. The first variation was to pivot off the front hairline, right in the center part there, boom. Can it be done on a side pie? Yeah, but then it's going to be asymmetric. You have to start doing different lengths on either side, right? So what I did with that is I lifted up, pivoted all the way around, and continued to lift up. So what that did is it gave me that concave all the way through, and it gave me a round shape. So back to front, round concave layer. Then I changed it, I switched it up and I stood in the front, used vertical diagonal back sections, and I pulled to about the eyebrow level. So it kind of pulls that top down a little bit, but it also lifts this underneath up to that spot. So we have a little bit of a kind of this going on through there. And then what I did is I just chopped the length off, and it also gave me another variant of the layered bob, but obviously with more of the front taken out, and it allowed me to have this kind of curtainy or heavy bang if needed. Anyway, I enjoyed that one. So the last thing I would do is the same thing as Kelly. Put some stuff in it, put some product in it, put some Evo in it. Probably work with the Easy Tiger. I love that. Kind of nice, smooth. I sprayed the hair with Day of Grace. So that kind of adds like as a cutting lotion a little bit as I'm working through. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed today's class, and we'll be back next time.
Ta-da! So here's our round side. You can see it's opened up that cheekbone. The front view you can see all the way through. A nice face framing here. Profile view too. This is the stuff that hairdressers love, is that profile view. I think a lot of clients don't see this view. This is for us to know that we're right on track. So we have this, short to long in the back. And then now the triangular side, you can see that all of this length is really kind of blocking that off a little bit. We've got a ton of layers over here, and then our profile view, shorter in the back to longer in the front. Now it's cool too, as we get to play around and do these classes just to have this visual for us to be able to see and kind of play around. But this doll head is cut at the same length. Each side, these are the same length as far as removing the length, but what a difference in how it presents when it's triangular versus round, where this is so much, feels so much shorter in the front, but we've actually preserved that length in the back. So same with this one, where we have all the length preserved in the front.
And we did it on the same side.
Oh my God, twins.
Same.
Round, triangular, round, triangular.
Totally.
So
I want to dry these and see.
Yeah, we should do that now. So we'll do that. We'll finish these off, and then we'll put the finished looks up on the stories and stuff like that later. But thanks for joining in, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Cool, guys.